The sun spilled across the Napa Valley hills, warming the golden slopes and rows of grapevines that seemed to stretch forever. The air carried a soft scent of spring blossoms mixed with the faint tang of ripening grapes. I pulled my cardigan a little tighter around my shoulders as I walked up the gravel path toward the vineyard's main hall, clutching my small clutch purse and the envelope with my son's wedding gift inside. Clusters of guests in pastel dresses and dark suits laughed near the entryway, their voices rising and falling like wind through the vines. My shoes crunched against the gravel as I approached the check-in table draped in ivory linen. A young woman with a tight bun and a tablet barely glanced up before plucking a flimsy square of white paper from a box. "Here you go," she said, handing it to me without a smile. The badge was thin, its corner already slightly bent, with two stark black words printed across the front: "Restricted guest." No ribbon, no lanyard, just paper. I stared at it, confused, the edges soft against my fingertips. Before I could ask anything, the breeze carried a familiar voice from just a few feet away. "Just a few more hours," Vanessa whispered to her mother. "Eleanor," the words laced with amusement. "Then her honeymoon money is ours." I froze. My heart kicked against my ribs as if it had heard something I wasn't supposed to. Eleanor gave a light, tinkling laugh, and the two women disappeared through the grand doorway into the hall, leaving a faint trail of expensive perfume behind. A moment later, Vanessa reappeared, gliding toward me in her lace gown, her smile polished but empty. She lowered her voice as if sharing a private joke. "It means you don't have a plated meal, but you'll be fine." "Right." She didn't wait for an answer before adjusting the strap of her bouquet and moving back inside, her heels tapping against the stone steps. I stood there for a moment, the paper badge trembling slightly in my hand. Heat crawled up the back of my neck as the distant sound of music drifted from the reception hall. I thought of the nights I had worked extra shifts to help pay for this very day, of the deposit I had covered without complaint, of the gift envelope in my purse that held my quiet offering of love. For the first time in 33 years, I felt like a stranger in my son's life. I fastened the paper badge to my cardigan and took a slow breath, then stepped toward the main hall where the rest of the guests were already celebrating. Unaware of the first crack forming in my heart, I settled into a quiet corner of the vineyard hall, trying to blend into the flow of guests who didn't notice me. Laughter and the clinking of glasses floated through the air, but all I could hear was the echo of my own memories, pulling me backward to another life. I was 28 the morning the call came. Daniel had left for his shift at the factory, his thermos of coffee still warm on the kitchen counter. Dylan was 7, eating a bowl of cereal at our small table, his feet swinging above the floor. The voice on the other end of the line was steady, almost detached, when it told me a machine had malfunctioned, and my husband was gone. Grief didn't come with time to collapse. The rent was due, and Dylan needed dinner. I traded my evenings for overnight shifts at the pediatric clinic and filled my weekends with in-home care jobs. 4 hours of sleep became normal. My scrubs were secondhand, faded from someone else's years of work, and I stitched the hems myself when they frayed. Every choice I made revolved around Dylan. I sold my wedding ring to buy him his first laptop for school, telling myself that letting go of the band on my finger didn't mean letting go of Daniel. I canceled the only vacation I had ever planned for myself when the orthodontist told me the cost of braces. I remember Dylan's small arms wrapping around my neck after one particularly long night. "I'll take care of you one day, Mom," he had whispered, his breath warm against my cheek. I had believed him. Those words became a quiet promise I carried through every bleary dawn and every stack of overdue bills. And yet here I was, standing at the edge of his wedding, holding a badge that told the world I didn't belong. My sacrifices had built his future, and somehow, that future had no seat for me. I touched the envelope in my purse, the crisp paper beneath my fingertips, reminding me of every overtime hour that earned it. And my chest tightened as the laughter from the head table carried across the room. After Dylan graduated college, he moved to Chicago with Vanessa. At first, I told myself that the distance was natural, that young people had busy lives and new routines. I called every Sunday evening, and for a while. He always answered. We would talk about his new job, about how small their apartment was, about the city traffic. But as the months passed, the calls grew shorter, the responses more distracted, and sometimes my calls went straight to voicemail. Text messages became our primary connection, and even those were often delayed. I would send a simple, "Love you, hope your week is good," and see the read receipt linger without reply for hours, sometimes days. I tried to ignore the pang in my chest each time. I learned more about his life from social media than from his voice. Scrolling through Instagram, I saw him in bright brunch cafes, raising mimosas with a circle of friends I didn't know. Vanessa always tagged the place's rooftop bars, riverfront restaurants, weekend trips to Michigan. There were smiles, golden sunlight, and the kind of laughter that once had filled our small living room when he was a boy. One weekend, I was finally invited to a small gathering. I drove in, clutching a casserole dish like an anchor, hoping to feel included. I remember Vanessa's voice ringing out as she introduced me to one of her friends. "This is Dylan's mom. She's a nurse, not the fancy kind." They laughed lightly, and I forced myself to join in, even as my stomach tightened. It wasn't the words alone, it was the tone, polished and dismissive. A reminder that, in their world, I was tolerated, but not admired. On the drive home, the city lights blurred in my rearview mirror. I kept one hand on the wheel and one on the empty seat beside me, where Dylan had once sat, talking about superheroes and spelling tests. My place in his life felt smaller with each passing season, as if someone were quietly erasing me line by line, until one day I would disappear entirely. The first time I met Eleanor Langley, I felt like I'd stepped into a different world. Vanessa had insisted we meet for coffee to talk wedding details, and she chose an upscale hotel cafe downtown. I arrived 10 minutes early, smoothing my cardigan, already feeling out of place among the sleek marble floors and the soft hum of polite conversation. Eleanor entered exactly on time, gliding across the room as if the world adjusted itself for her arrival. She wore a crisp white linen dress and pearl earrings that caught the morning light. Her Hermes bag rested in the crook of her elbow like a trophy. Even her perfume was soft but commanding, the kind that lingered after she left. "Vivian," she said, her smile perfectly measured. "It's so lovely to finally meet you." I rose and shook her hand, feeling the coolness of her fingers, the smoothness of her world brushing against my own. We ordered cappuccinos. Eleanor talked about the vineyard venue, the floral arrangements, the seating chart as if she had been born orchestrating grand events. When the conversation shifted to finances, her compliment landed like a sting. So generous. For someone on a nurse's pension, I felt the blood rush to my cheeks, but I smiled and nodded, pretending it was kindness instead of condescension. I agreed to pay part of the flower arrangements and cover the deposit for the venue, telling myself it was my contribution, a way to make sure Dylan's day was perfect. Maybe, I thought, if I kept giving, I'd be invited into the center of their lives again. As we parted, Eleanor kissed my cheek lightly, her perfume staying with me long after she disappeared into the elevator. Walking back to my car, I tried to swallow the unease creeping into my chest. I told myself weddings were stressful, that people said things they didn't mean, and that this day, his day, would close the distance I felt stretching further with each season. I drove home with the receipt for the deposit tucked in my bag and hope clinging to me like a fragile ribbon, not knowing it would fray completely the moment I stepped into the reception hall. The reception hall glowed with soft amber light. Twinkling string bulbs strung across the ceiling and reflected in the polished wine barrels that lined the walls. Guests floated through the space in gowns and tailored suits, their laughter mingling with the hum of a string quartet. The air smelled faintly of oak and expensive perfume. A world polished smooth, without a place for me. At the entrance, a line formed as guests collected their seating cards and golden lanyards printed in elegant script. Family, table 1. A hostess draped one over the shoulders of a cousin I'd only met once. He grinned for a photo before stepping aside, the lanyard gleaming against his suit. When it was my turn, I approached the tall easel displaying the seating chart. I scanned the swirling letters, moving from the head table to the surrounding circles. No Vivian Lockhart. My eyes swept the bottom. The extra tables labeled with numbers. Nothing. I ran a fingertip over the glass, as if my name might appear if I touched it hard enough. A waiter carrying a tray of champagne flutes passed by without offering me one. Another followed with tiny crab cakes, pausing to let a group of bridesmaids take some before walking straight past me. I stayed near the edge of the room, my badge pressed flat against my chest, invisible in plain sight. Across the room, Dylan sat at the head table, his hand resting lightly on Vanessa's. Cameras flashed as they leaned toward each other, radiant, framed by roses and candlelight. My chest tightened, heat blooming behind my eyes. Every corner of the room seemed to confirm the same truth: I did not belong here. Then I noticed the gift table in the corner, draped in white linen, stacked with glossy envelopes and ribboned boxes. My gaze landed on a plain white envelope with my handwriting, unadorned and unclaimed. I walked over, my heels tapping against the wooden floor, and slid it into my hand. Inside was the $7,000 I had scraped together overtime shifts, missed holidays, a canceled beach trip I had promised myself after retirement. Each bill inside that envelope was a piece of me, a piece of the life I had given away without keeping any for myself. I held it close to my chest, surrounded by music and laughter that didn't include me, and realized I was already halfway out the door. The moment my fingers closed around that envelope, my feet moved on their own. I slipped through the side door of the hall, the hum of music and laughter trailing behind me like smoke. Outside, the night air was cooler, brushing against my face as if the world beyond the party had been waiting for me. My heels clicked across the gravel parking lot, each step sharp and final. The envelope gripped tight in my hand. Mom, wait. Dylan's voice cut through the dark, strained and uncertain. I froze for a single heartbeat, my back to the hall, then kept walking. The gravel shifted beneath my steps, and the sound of my son faded into the wind. When I reached my car, my hands trembled so badly I almost dropped the keys. I slid into the driver's seat, the leather cold against my skin, and stared at the steering wheel. For 33 years, I had lived for him through sleepless nights, double shifts, and the quiet ache of lonely birthdays. I had bent my life around his dreams until I barely had one of my own. Tonight, I disappeared from his life. The engine stuttered to life, its soft rumble grounding me. Headlights swept across the vineyard rows as I backed out, catching a fleeting glimpse of the hall through the rearview mirror. Behind the arched windows, people were raising glasses, dancing under the lights, and smiling for photos that would never include me. The laughter and music faded as I turned onto the narrow road that wound through the hills. By the time I reached the main highway, the vineyard was a distant glow against the night. My chest ached, but my breathing came steady. As if the farther I drove, the lighter I became. When I pulled into my driveway, the river's soft current whispered behind my house. I sat in the quiet, hands still on the wheel, listening to the hum of my own heartbeat, knowing the phone would start buzzing before the night was over. For 3 days, I let my phone buzz and ring without answering. Voicemails stacked one after another. Text messages scrolled endlessly across the screen, some from Dylan, a few from Vanessa, and others from numbers I didn't recognize. Each one was some version of confusion, concern, or polished damage control. None of them said the one word I needed. Sorry. On the third evening, Dylan's cousin, Trevor, called. Against my better judgment, I picked up. His voice was hesitant, low, like he was sharing a secret he wasn't sure he had the right to tell. Aunt Vivian, I think you should know, he began. You were on the family table. The first seating chart had you right there, next to Dylan. I pressed the phone to my ear. Silent. 3 days before the wedding, Vanessa and her mom changed it. He continued. They sent the update to everyone. And Dylan, he signed off on it. I'm sorry. I thought maybe you already knew. I whispered my thanks and ended the call. My house was still, the river outside whispering against the bank. And yet the silence inside me was louder than anything I'd ever heard. I hadn't been overlooked. I hadn't been misplaced. I had been deliberately erased. Later that night, scrolling through my phone, I made the mistake of opening Instagram. Vanessa's story glowed at the top of my feed, a photo of her and Dylan twirling under the vineyard lights. Her caption in looping white text, finally, a drama-free wedding, free from old baggage. My stomach hollowed. My hands went cold. All the years of scraped knees and bedtime stories. The hours of work and the promises whispered by a little boy they had all led here, to a caption that turned me into nothing more than a weight they were proud to drop. Cold clarity settled in my chest, steady and unshakable. I wasn't a mother in their story anymore. I was a shadow they had stepped over, and I knew, with an ache like stone, that something inside me had finally closed. On the 4th day, my phone lit up with Dylan's name. I let it ring twice before I answered, bracing myself for whatever version of his voice I would get: angry, guilty, or pleading. When I finally pressed accept, there was only a pause and the soft hum of the line. Mom? His tone was hesitant, thinner than I remembered. We can't book the honeymoon without your check. The words slid through me like ice water, clear and cutting. Not, are you okay? Not, I'm sorry. Just the price tag of my love. Finally said out loud. I didn't speak at first. I let the silence stretch until it felt like its own language. When I did answer, my voice was steady, almost cold in its calm. If I ever give again, I said slowly, it will come with contracts, not vows. He inhaled sharply. Mom, come on. It's not like that. It's exactly like that. My hand tightened around the edge of the kitchen counter. You wanted the money, not the mother. And I won't play that role anymore. On the other end, Dylan said nothing. The quiet was heavier than shouting could ever have been. I could almost hear the click of realization as he understood that the version of me who gave without limits was gone. I don't know what to say, he muttered finally. There's nothing to say, I replied. And I hung up before my voice could tremble. The house was silent, except for the river outside and the faint hum of the refrigerator. I set the phone on the counter and let my hand rest over the white envelope. Its weight a reminder that I could finally choose where my sacrifices went. For the first time in decades, I felt the sharp edge of freedom, lonely, but mine and I knew I wouldn't spend another dollar buying a place in a life that had already closed its doors to me. The next morning, I drove to the local nursery, the one with rows of wooden tables and the smell of damp soil and fertilizer that clung to the air. I wandered between the aisles until my fingers brushed over the smooth petals of deep purple tulips, their color rich and steady. Nearby, a tray of lavender caught my eye. The soft fragrance already whispering of calm. I filled a cart with both, along with fresh soil and a small trowel, and checked out, without hesitation, back at home. I carried the plants to the strip of earth along the river behind my house. The ground was cool and forgiving beneath my hands as I dug small cradles for the bulbs and flowers. Each scoop of soil felt like a quiet promise to myself. I pressed the tulips into the earth, imagining their blooms rising toward the spring sun, and the lavender swaying gently in the wind. As I worked, a memory surfaced. Uninvited Dylan at 6 years old, running up the riverbank with a fistful of wildflowers. His cheeks had been streaked with dirt, his voice bright as he called, "For you, Mom." I had placed those ragged flowers in a cup of water and set them by the kitchen window, my heart full then in a way it no longer could be. When the last plant was in the ground, I brushed the dirt from my hands and went back inside. I pulled the white envelope from my purse, still heavy with the $7,000 that had been meant for them. I uncapped a pen and, in careful letters, wrote across the front for me, not for them. I placed it in my desk drawer and looked out at the riverbank, where my small garden waited to take root. The flowers would bloom without permission, without apology. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I might. 2 weeks passed like gentle tides. My phone filled with messages I didn't open. Dylan's long emails, paragraphs of careful reasoning and soft excuses. Vanessa's single, clipped line, "We can work this out." I didn't reply to either. I left the family group chat without announcement. The quiet exit leaving a single gray notification: Vivian has left the conversation. Life around me shifted slowly but steadily. My tulips began to break through the soil, green tips reaching toward the sun. While the lavender swayed in the riverside breeze, I realized I had not cried in weeks. Silence had stopped feeling like emptiness and had begun to feel like space. One morning, I booked a flight to Portland. It was a trip I had promised myself decades ago. A dream that had always been pushed aside for someone else's needs: school fees, car repairs, last-minute emergencies that swallowed my life in small bites. This time, there were no hesitations, no second thoughts. The first evening there, I walked along a coastal trail as the sun slid toward the horizon. The air was sharp with salt, and the wind tugged at my gray hair like playful fingers. Waves slammed against black rock below, and gulls wheeled overhead. My phone was on airplane mode, tucked deep in my pocket, as silent as the family I had finally let go. I stopped at a lookout where the ocean opened endlessly in front of me, and for the first time, I felt my chest expand with something more than grief, something that tasted like freedom. I closed my eyes, letting the wind carry the words I whispered only for myself. They wanted the gift, not the mother. I gave myself the gift instead. When I opened my eyes again, the horizon burned with streaks of gold and crimson, and I walked forward into the wind, lighter than I had been in years.